right, as promised, we are on Michigan time. It's 10 after the hour, so I'd like to get us started by welcoming you to this year's Learning Analytics Summer Institute, hosted again here at the University of Michigan in cooperation with our Office of Academic Innovation. And my name is Stephanie Teasley, and I'm delighted to welcome you here this year with my new hat on, or my other hat on. I'm a faculty member here at Michigan in the School of Information, and I'm the new president of SOLAR. So it's an extra delight. Thank you. That's all right. I left the tiara at home, but you know, it might come out again. You just don't know. So I think we have an exciting lineup for you for the next couple days. Our biggest request from last year was, I want to learn more. So this year we've redesigned it to be, as you know, a full workshop, hands-on, that you'll have over the course of several days, and then your option in each of the Tuesday and Wednesday morning to take a tutorial about one of the other workshops or a couple of other extra topics that we added. Some of you know I put the lists over there because some people forgot what they signed up for. And also at the time of sign up, we didn't know which ones were going to be on Tuesday and which ones are going to be on Wednesday. So some people ended up in two on the same day. So if you haven't already done so, or when we're done and we're in the reception part, wander over to those sheets and solve your problems, because you can. We won't hold you to what's printed there. We want you to get what you want and need out of the next few days. So unless one workshop gets too big for the room that we provided, you can make some decisions over there on yourself. So this is the second, as I said, LASI at Michigan, and the fourth LASI in total. We had one at Stanford and one at Harvard that Charles was integrally involved in. We skipped a year, and then we came here to Michigan with the hope maybe that we would be doing it here each year. So here we are, the second year in a row. And as I said, we've expanded the program in slightly different ways. We have 3 wonderful keynotes for you that I think that you'll enjoy. And we have a lovely reception tonight. You got your drink tickets. And if you look in your packet, you have a half sheet of paper in there that looks like a list, and the top says scavenger hunt. So it's not a thing scavenger hunt, it's a people scavenger hunt. We've done this for a few years at the Cyber Learning meeting, and it turns out to be a really good way to get to know people. So when we break and we're in the reception, find people and fill names in on that list, and when you get it full, give it to myself or Grace. Grace, stand up. We're the ladies in the black stripes today. We did not coordinate this, but that's how it turned out. And we'll write the day and time on there, and then the first person who gets it completely filled out with the most unique names will get a special prize that we'll award on Thursday. You may find someone whose name fits in more than one slot. You can do that if you want, but at the end of the day, the winner will be determined by the most unique names. I'm pretty sure every category on that list can be filled out by the people in this room and the people who will be around the next day or so. If there's one that you're stuck on, maybe everybody's stuck on it and there was a little miscalculation, but I don't think so. I think you could, if you talk to people, and if you don't get it filled out tonight, no problem, take it tomorrow. You got all the people in your tutorial, all the people in your workshop. It's just a fun way to get to know people, both some of the professional sides of them, and as you can see from the list, some of the more fun personal sides of them too. So really, when SOLAR hosts this workshop or this institute, the goal of it is to build community and to build capacity for learning analytics research. So I assume that's why you came, because you are part of the SOLAR community. That's why we make you register to be a member before you can come. But also because we're a growing field, and we want it to continue to grow, and the way it continues to grow is that people come to understand what it is about. More and more institutions get the capacity to learn how to do it, and we train more and more people who know what learning analytics is about, because to date, there is no one who has a PhD in learning analytics. At the time when I was a graduate student, it was before there was learning sciences, And I can say now that my training was as a learning scientist, but I didn't have a PhD in learning sciences. The first PhD in learning sciences is one of my colleagues here on campus, Barry Fishman. So, I mean, it shows that as these schools develop, the School of Information, we became a new program, and now there are PhDs in information. So who knows when we'll be able to award the first PhD in learning analytics. Maybe it could be one of you. Maybe one of you will become the faculty member who offers that first PhD. But I invite you to enjoy yourself over the next few days, learn as much as you can. A number of the members of the Solar Executive Committee are here from around the world. That's the other thing that I'm really proud of with LASI'. We are truly a very international organization, and some of you came from pretty far away to be here, so that's very impressive. So get to know each other. You're all a resource for each other, and I hope you'll enjoy being here. The other local note I wanted to say, if you weren't here last year, we have changed buildings. We're here in the Union. Over that way on campus is the Michigan League and the Rackham Graduate School. The city of Ann Arbor hosts a summer festival every year for about 5 or 6 weeks. Last summer, it was pretty much right outside the door of the building we were in. This summer, you'll have to walk down the street, but there's live music, there's vendors for ice cream and pizza and falafel, and kids running around. It's a real local scene, and I know it's a little hot outside, but that's every evening, and actually when it gets dark enough, there's a free movie out there every night too, live music. So get to know our town a little bit, get to know our campus, and welcome to Michigan. So next, I would like to introduce James Hilton, who's the Vice Provost for Academic Innovation here. He's a faculty member in my School of Information as well, and there's so much to say about James. I'm just going to let him talk about what he has, and it's his unit, the Office of Academic Innovation, that's helping us launch this. So thank you, James, for being here.
My pleasure. Hi there. Welcome to Ann Arbor at the very best time of the year to be in Ann Arbor, by far. I'm thrilled to welcome LASI' back to Ann Arbor. We do have designs on making this sort of a regular thing here. It's a wonderful event with terrific leadership and great members working together to improve scholarship, create new collaborations, and create a global community around learning analytics. So I want to thank you all for attending and for giving us our second opportunity to host this event. I also want to acknowledge the amazing Michigan faculty, Stephanie, Tim McKay, Chris Brooks, and a whole host of other people who for bringing the learning analytics to the center of our academic innovation strategy at Michigan. And it would be, I don't know whether you're going to get this sense over the next couple of days when you're here, but I think for those of us who are at Michigan right now, it feels like a really unique time. I've been at Michigan now for a total of 25 years, and I've never been as optimistic about the future of higher education, despite all the trends in the world right now. The faculty and students who are engaged in academic innovation centered around learning analytics here, I think, have the power to transform how we not only approach teaching and learning, but how we talk about and present teaching and learning to the world. Higher education, we lost the narrative a long time ago. And one of the things that learning analytics gives us an opportunity to do, I think, is to reclaim the narrative. When I was a kid, higher education was the answer to all the problems of the world. I still actually believe it's the answer to all the problems of the world. We just haven't been shouting it loudly enough or coherently enough. I hope you get a taste of the place in the next couple of days, get a taste of what again feels like a renaissance here. We continue to double down on investments in learning analytics at Michigan. Last year in addressing this group, I noted with a certain irony that as scholars, we focus most of our attention on data and analysis. But that in evaluating teaching and learning and the impact that college has on our students, we've been relatively content to rely upon what I think of as faith-based assertions. We know we change habits of minds, we know we transform lives, and we know it because, well, we know it. And we profess that we know it all the time. And I suggested that one of the great promises of learning analytics is that in addition to helping us learn what works and doesn't work for an increasingly diverse group of students who need personalized learning at scale, we have the opportunity to address the impact that education has on habits of mind and quality of life with data and analysis. We have the opportunity to reconcile our scholarly lives with our teaching lives and to elevate and reclaim the conversation around the role of higher education in modern society. I continue to believe in the power that learning analytics have to transform education, to help us move from an industrial one-size-fits-all model of education to one that is personalized and biased towards success. This year, I would add to the exhortation the importance of breathing through the hype cycle. Learning analytics won't magically solve everything. Dashboards won't fix all that needs fixing in an educational model grounded in the early 19th century. But it's the single best hope for moving away from these faith-based assertions about the relevance and importance of education and creating a more flexible and efficacious learning environment. One of the things that I think we've been good at here at Michigan is resisting the hype cycle. So when MOOCs came along in 2012, massive open online courses, it's really kind of entertaining to go back and read that year's coverage. Focus mostly on the Chronicle, because in the Chronicle of Higher Education, once something is announced as transformative and potentially breakthrough, it's then almost instantaneously trashed and left as so much dust in the wind. But it's really interesting to watch what happened with MOOCs. They were going to disrupt, they were going to transform, they were going to democratize, they were going to make obsolete this campus and every other campus. We didn't believe that. We did believe that they provided a really interesting way to think about how you deliver education at scale, and a way to sort of think about breaking with a narrative around online learning that tried to create online learning in the image of residential learning. So if you look at a lot of the early discussion about online learning, the question is, can you replicate the residential experience? And we sort of used MOOCs as an opportunity to experiment and to embrace the notion that online and residential are inherently different. The trick is to figure out what each is good for separately and what together they might be able to do. So we resisted when MOOCs were going to transform the world. We didn't believe it. When MOOCs were declared dead and gone, we didn't believe it. I think that learning analytics and big data more generally are going to experience the same hype cycle. Solve all the world's problems and then immediately be so disappointing afterwards. So, I would encourage you to keep the faith on learning analytics and be open to thinking about different ways to think about analysis. So the sort of trick that I think AI has been really good at here is not deciding what we thought a MOOC was. So we have lots of things that we call MOOCs. No two of them are alike, and we don't really worry about it. We hesitate. We resist defining things before we understand them. I think the same thing is going to be true in learning analytics. Indeed, I would say that Michigan's ability to move quickly in creating a new model for academic R&D based out of the Office of Academic Innovation has been made possible because of Michigan's deep and growing commitment to learning analytics. And that commitment shows up at a grassroots level, it shows up across schools and colleges, and it shows up at the level of the provost and the president. And it's allowing us to blur the lines between research and teaching and learning, and to be more experimental in our approach to the curriculum in the classroom. And so I'll close with the hope that you'll pursue two lines of action during and coming out of this institute. The first is I encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity together to identify the next best set of questions to advance this field and to find new collaborations. The era of big data isn't magic. Big data is a tool that still requires imagination, thoughtful deliberation, and analysis. All the data in the world won't help if we don't find the right questions. So I hope you'll take finding those questions as sort of job one over the next several days and in the year ahead. And second, I hope you'll come to see Michigan as your home away from home in all things related to learning analytics for three reasons. First, did I mention June is the time you want to be in Ann Arbor? It's not coincidental that we don't hold this in January. Second, as I said, we're fully committed to learning analytics and anticipate making more investments in learning analytics in the year ahead. I'm hopeful that when we come out of a board meeting in the next week or two, there's going to be another pretty big announcement in that space. And third, as a great public university, we consistently tilt towards openness. We see the enduring strength of higher education generally, and Michigan specifically, in the collaborations we build, the information we share, and the expertise we develop together. So we really are thrilled to have you here, and we hope you find the next few days challenging, informative, inspiring, and fun along the way. So thanks for listening. Hope you have a great institute. The work that you're doing is actually vital to the academy, so do it well.
We like to get people fired up here at Michigan. Thank you, James, for helping fire things up, and the challenge to those of us who are here to think deeply and have fun. I am pleased to introduce our very first keynote for this year's LASI, someone who has been in the LASI community since pretty much the very beginning of thinking about learning analytics. Simon Buckingham Shum is a professor of learning informatics at the University of Technology, Sydney, where he directs the Connected Intelligence Center, or CIC for short. CIC works at the intersection of research and teaching and learning to break new ground in the use of data and analytics within the university to improve student experience. His background, his bachelor's degree is in psychology from the University of York. He has a master's in ergonomics from the University of College London and a PhD in human-computer interaction back at the University of York, and also in collaboration with Europark, Xerox's Europark. Some of you know about that. Before he came to Sydney, he was a professor of learning informatics at the Open University's Knowledge Media Institute. He has done learning emergence in global sense-making networks. He's the co-founder and general editor of the Journal of Interactive Media in Education. He's been an investigator in the Open Learn program, which has published thousands of hours of Open University courses as a Creative Commons open educational resource. He's been the director of OU's Social Learn project, and he's advised the Future Learn MOOC team on analytics. It was around 2010 that he became active in this new growing field of learning analytics. He's been a founding member of the Society for Learning Analytics Research, and he's been on the executive board and been a vice president, so definitely held some leadership roles in Solar. His publications, he's got a couple of books, one that he wrote with a collaborator, Al Selvin, on constructing knowledge. There's a volume that he helped to edit called Knowledge Cartography. And he has lots of papers, and the titles include things like New Ways of Deliberating Online, Social Learning Analytics, Reflective Writing Analytics, and Learning Analytics for 21st Century Competencies. So all very interesting topics, areas for learning analytics. His keynote today is titled Learning Analytics versus Cognitive Automation, Rationale, Examples, and Organizational Strategy, where he's going to talk with us today about a university-wide strategy around data and analytics and the deployment of different kinds of learning analytics. So we're thrilled to have him here. I'd like to welcome Simon Buckingham Shum. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Stephanie. And thanks everybody for coming. It's a real privilege to be asked to kick off this year's LASI. I've been involved, as Stephanie said, for a long time in learning analytics. And the chance to brief you guys on my current thinking about what's going on in the field is a real privilege. So I hope you enjoy this. I haven't given this one before, so it's going to be interesting to see what you think of it over a drink afterwards. So what we're going to talk about is the rise of AI, and I'm afraid that means artificial intelligence, not academic innovation. And we're thinking a lot at UTS about the future of work and about the qualities that graduates are going to need to survive and thrive in a very turbulent kind of space. But it's not just about equipping graduates for work, it's also about equipping them to think as citizens. And perhaps now, more than any other time, we might be looking for citizens who can think and engage in their democracy. So the qualities I'm talking about are not only about job relevance, but about life relevance, I would say. Okay, so I'm going to explain a few things about why I think this is important, and also how that fits into the university-wide strategy. Because as has been noted, we're not going to transform learning just by deploying cool big data. There are systems and structures in place that constrain what can go on. And that needs a university-wide strategy to think through, not a learning analytics group, not even the best one in the world. Everything I do is invariably in collaboration with my colleagues here. You'll be seeing their names at various points. Andrew Gibson is here with me from Sydney, and we'll be teaching you all about writing analytics over this week. Okay, well, here we go. The machines are coming. Everybody is talking about the future of work, automation, and what that might mean for society. So we'll briefly recap on that, but I'm not going to say an awful lot about it because we know it's coming and so forth. I'm going to think about really, well, how should the learning analytics community respond? How should we respond to this challenge? Because we're partly to blame, right? We're trying to automate learning and teaching. So we could be the bad guys, but I'm hoping we could be the good guys too. And then I'm going to talk about how this fits into the bigger picture at UTS, about how we think about learning strategy, and in particular, how we think about innovating analytics, because we're not going to tackle the kinds of qualities that we need to build in our learners aren't going to come from the kinds of dashboards we currently see in products. New kinds of analytics need to be invented, but we also want to see them rolled out and make an impact. So how does a university do that? We don't have the answer. We have a work-in-progress prototype, and I spent a fantastic morning with the academic innovation team hearing from Tim and colleagues how they do that here through the Academic Innovation Center, which in my view is probably leading the world in the way that they're thinking about it and the way they work with faculty. Okay, but before we jump into that, I'm going to take you back to 1968. Hands up here, those of you who are familiar with Doug Engelbart and his work. Okay, right. Well, I'm delighted to see that because I want to introduce you to Doug. Doug is actually somebody I got to know in his latter years. He wrote the afterword to my first book. It's 1968. It's the joint fall conference where people demo the latest cool stuff. And there's the hall. Doesn't look so different from this one, actually. Lots of chairs in a row and a big screen at the front. Okay, so Doug Engelbart has been working at SRI and doing some rather interesting work. And I've got a couple of video clips here. So I'm going to play the first one. Here he is. He's all mic'd up, and behind him you can see the screen that he is looking at.
In my office, I have a console like this, and there are 12 others that are computer supplies. And we try nowadays to do our daily work on here. So this characterizes the way I could sit here and look at a completely blank piece of paper. That's the way I start many projects. So with my system, that's a good good start. I'll sit here and say, I'd like to load that in. So, very sorry about that. So I'm putting in an entity called a statement, and that's full of other entities called words. And if I make some mistakes, I can back up a little bit. So I have a statement with some entities, words, and I can do some operations.
Okay, now the screen's a little bit washed out, but hopefully you can see that Doug was typing some stuff in there. Now, did you see what he did there? He deleted some words when he decided that he wanted to delete them, and then he typed some new things. Wow. Wow. Nobody had ever done that before. Nobody had ever shown that a computer could be a tool for thinking. That a computer wasn't a huge wardrobe that you just fed punch cards into to do more calculations than a human could do with numbers. A computer is a tool for thinking, and you might be able to talk to it in the way that you think, and it could respond fast enough as your thoughts developed. That was a revolution. And he goes on.
Talk to each other and point, and maybe later I can hand you the chalk on this blackboard, like saying, here, you control it. Let's status mode now, and add another feature that hardware-wise is available through the kind of display we have. I'd like to see you while I'm working on it. So before I can do that, I'd have to set up my display in a certain way. Set it up so I see it over like that. That leaves a corner up there, and I say, now computer, do the automatic switching that'll bring in a camera picture from the camera mounted on his console, such as the camera mounted on mine is. Hi, Bill. That's great. Now we're connected audio.
Oh my word. It's real-time collaborative editing with video conferencing. This is Google Docs and Hangout. This is Skype and screen sharing in 1968. Nobody had ever done that before. So Doug invents this. Oh, and the mouse. Don't know if you saw he was gesturing. Oh, and hypertext. Oh, and Windows and graphics. And the whole concept of collective intelligence. And the modern paradigm of personal computing. And networked improvement communities, which we now see going forward in all sorts of ways, like with the Carnegie Foundation. Thank you, Britta. So, I mean, a legend, and this is why he was doing it, okay? 1968, I don't think that problem's gone away. And for those of you who'd like to see more of that, go to dougengelbart.org, where you will find the mother of all demos, as it's come to be known. Now, what we see there are computers framed as tools for thought, tools for personal thought, and tools for collective intelligence. And Doug is well known for inventing the personal computing paradigm that we now just take for granted. He's lesser known and lesser recognized for the tougher problem he was trying to solve, which was how you co-evolve a system of humans and the ways they work and the tools they use and the methods and practices that they've come to be ingrained in their practice, and how you co-evolve those together with new technology. Because that's a tougher problem in many ways. So, we're going to come back to Doug, but in a sense, what we're now facing is, of course, an explosion in technology, which is changing the kinds of work that are going to become available. It's also erasing certain kinds of jobs. And Doug's approach to thinking about the role of computers, the role of visualizations as tools for thinking with, will become very evident. Okay, so I'm going to throw some graphs at you. You will probably all have seen things like this, okay? This is a change index from the US. It's 1960 to 2009. Non-routine manual tasks are sort of have been falling but are leveling out. Routine manual tasks are falling. Routine cognitive tasks are falling. What's on the rise? Working with new information and solving unstructured problems, or what we might call wicked problems in Horst Rittel's language, or in Doug's language, complex, urgent problems facing humanity. Okay. Here's another one. This is from Australia. Same old story. Non-routine cognitive work is on the rise. Routine manual is falling. Routine cognitive is starting to go down here. This is this is up to 2016. Non-routine manual on the rise. So some people think that certain forms of craftsmanship and other creative professions will continue to survive, even if they're not, data-intensive knowledge work, right? But artisanal creativity. The thing is, what counts as non-routine may start reducing increasingly as AI improves, because things we thought AI would never be able to solve because they were too complicated turn out to, in fact, have deep patterns to them. Here's a last one, pretty sobering stuff. This is from the AI Now White House conference that was run last year. What's the probability that you're going to get automated out of your job? Okay. If you earn less than $20 an hour, you should be worried. Okay? Through to there. And of course, that corresponds with certain kinds of work. All right? From Jason Furman, who knows about these things. Trust me. Okay. So there's lots and lots more. If you just start Googling future of work, automation, there is controversy about how much of a risk there is. Some people feel it's overstated. But some fairly sober-minded people have got some fairly sombering things to say. And I think the question for us is, well, what is the response from the learning analytics community to be? Because the situation is this, right? That as analytics start to aggregate lower-level data increasingly, and AI starts to automate the routine stuff, what do we need to do? Well, arguably, we need to move to the higher ground. We need to train data scientists up who aren't just thinking like machines, first of all. They're thinking ethically, and they know about all the creative, they're thinking creatively, and that's how we train our data scientists in our master's program, and they found that to be immensely valuable. But for us specifically, we need to deploy all the weapons of AI and data science that are being thrown at us and potentially automating us out of work, and actually apply those to cultivate the higher order competencies that will keep us different from the machines. Okay? So it's a jujitsu move. We need to harness all the technology that could automate people out of work in order to raise the competencies that will keep them in a unique space that machines aren't going to get to, at least not for a while, we hope. Okay. Those qualities that we consider to be distinctively human. And as we were just hearing, how could we evidence those rather than just being faith-based assertions? We claim that education gives you these higher order competencies, that a true higher education will transform you in certain kinds of ways, habits of mind, dispositions, etc. We'll come back to some of those in a moment. Okay? So, that's sort of a position statement to make. You may not have thought about it like that before, but that's essentially what I think learning analytics should be doing. Okay? Unfortunately, what we take to be distinctively human has always been contested and in transition with the rise of technology, and that's just going to keep changing. Okay? So the water keeps rising, so humans have to keep moving to higher ground. Okay? Humans aren't needed to write certain kinds of journalistic articles anymore. Humans aren't, accountants are retraining like nobody's business because they can see the writing on the wall. And some teachers may be threatened by the technologies we're developing. Because we're saying, if you can't do any better than a machine is a lot more efficient. And they will rightly feel scared by that. And we rightly need to ask ourselves whether that is actually what we're saying and whether that's how we're being perceived as well. Okay. At UTS, we have a saying. We went through the should we do MOOCs thing as well. This is before I arrived. But UTS had a should we jump on the MOOC bandwagon moment. Decided that no, what we needed to do was make the campus experience special to justify the fees that our students were paying. And the sort of blunt answer was, if you feel at risk from a MOOC, then your course probably should be a MOOC, because apparently you're adding no extra value to what somebody could get for free online. All right? I wonder, should we be thinking, if you feel at risk from an adaptive tutoring system, then maybe your course is better taken on an adaptive tutoring system, because apparently you can't articulate what value you add to a machine simply drilling over and over again patiently until you master certain competencies. So there is a role for those kinds of tutoring tools, right? But if you're not adding any additional value, when your students come together, if they're not getting something more out of being together than if they just sat at home on their machines, then you need to think about that. So hopefully none of us would disagree that this is what we're striving for at its best. Our higher education should be providing the right conditions for something that could even be transformational. You should walk out of university a different person. That's by no means always the case, of course, but that's what we'd like it to be, right? What are we talking about here, though, when we say that it should be an integrated experience, or you should, be seeing with new eyes? Well, here are the habits of mind, the dispositions that people talk about sometimes. Curiosity, a sense, a confidence and an agency about the way you tackle problems. Resilience, there's that word everybody's using all the time. You actually have an appetite for risk. You don't flee from those who challenge you. You don't only stay in your comfort zone. You actually value different perspectives as opposed to surrounding yourself in an echo chamber. It means we've got to provide very authentic learning tasks and assessments that build lifelong learning competencies. You don't really get those in a MOOC because it's hard to create authentic learning situations in a MOOC. And nobody knows how to assess or measure many of the lifelong learning competencies people talk about all the time, the 21st century skills and so forth. We'll look at some examples of those. It may mean that we're talking about showing it's not just about head knowledge, but it's about knowing how to integrate what I learned in the classroom with what I'm experiencing as a nurse on the ward, as a teacher in front of a bunch of 15-year-olds for the first time, as an engineer placed into an organization for 6 months, right? How is my identity changing? How am I connecting what I learned, 6 months ago in that lecture program with what's happening now on the building site? And there's a lot of talk about completing courses and spotting the at-risk students, right? But if university is about helping you figure out that you're on the wrong course and this is really where you should be, or if it's about helping students have a sense of what their calling might be in life, well, we've achieved our purpose then. That's a real identity kind of inner transformation kind of thing. So these are the things that excite me as well. Randy Bass at Georgetown has been an inspiration for me. He ran a fantastic set of video roundtables called Reinventing the University for the Whole Person. Again, resisting some of the forces that want to just drive for, the sort of more mind-numbing KPIs. I recommend that. And Randy's just published an article with Brett Einan where he talks about the forces that threaten to disaggregate higher education. He doesn't say they're all evil, but he says, but surely if we just give way to those, we have lost the plot somewhere, because we need to be helping a learner reintegrate all of these small nano courses they've done, He talks about, some of these forces here, designing discrete or granular experiences. He talks about, adaptive, intelligent tutoring systems. This is the sort of the world of breaking down learning into smaller and smaller nuggets to make it more personalized. But here he's worrying a lot that the university system must reintegrate, help the student reintegrate. Okay, so he talks about certain kinds of analytics. He also talks about knowledge, skills, and dispositions, which is getting at some of the things that we've been thinking about. So people are talking a lot about knowledge, skills, and dispositions or mindsets. Let's go back to Dewey, who talked about not just knowledge of methods alone. You've got to have the desire and the will to employ what you know, a readiness to act. This desire is an affair of personal disposition. Many other people talk about these things. Mindsets, of course, from all the Stanford work with Carol Dweck. Work from my colleagues looking at this. One of the key issues emerging from these findings was the learner's orientation towards the unknown, uncertainty and ambiguity, and their tendency to either retreat from it or move into it. What kinds of learners do we get out of high school which drills them so high on grades, but lack of choice and fear of failure, right? So at UTS, we talk about deprogramming our HSC students who've been through the New South Wales, high school system. We have to deprogram them out of their sort of egos, where they've walked in with a grade, sort of an ATAR, as we call it, of 90 something. I'm a 95 ATAR student, right? Well, you got there by doing certain things very well, but if you want to succeed at UTS, it's time to basically rewire your brain, because we're going to help you fail. But you're going to learn what that feels like, and then you're going to pick yourself up, and we're going to keep going. There are many, many people talking about different kinds of work skills. Here's one quite helpfully written one by the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto. They talk about some of the drivers that we just see out there in the world now. I won't go into all of these. And they talk about some of the qualities that are now needed to thrive in this space. I won't read through them all, but you can see some of them here. And at UTS, we've been taking on board some of these factors you'll see later. We've created a whole faculty around transdisciplinarity and innovation, and a whole bachelor's degree around sense-making and innovation thinking and design and so forth. And many, many universities are doing this now, of course. And that's part of the context in which we're now doing our data science work. So back to the question then, what are the implications for learning analytics? I'm just going to step through some examples of analytics that for me are signs of where we should be going. It's by no means an exhaustive list. Don't be offended if you're not in this group. I've just put them into various categories. Okay, here's one. Learning in the wild. So some of you will be familiar with the work that we've been doing with Kirsty Quito, Abelardo Pardo's here as well, where some of our most creative academics are the ones who take their students well out of the online learning management system and put them into these spaces, at which point they go off the radar because they're not owned by the university. And so we've been creating an infrastructure using the XAPI standard that can aggregate, with student permission, from specific spaces that are created for a course and aggregate that into a central learning record store. And here's an example from the LAC paper in 2016. There's a student dashboard which shows overall activity, cognitive presence, a social network, an egocentric network, and there's an educator dashboard showing the whole network. Okay, the point being that social network has been formed by looking at how I'm connected to all of you through the Twitter channel we're using, through Digo, through my edits on the shared Google Drive, through the Facebook chat or the YouTube channel we're using, right? So I might have followed or tweeted or responded to you in a variety of different spaces and we can aggregate that data and start running analytics on it to show the overall picture. Because in this work, we're interested in social learning. We're interested in making these things visible, and we want to integrate them into the way the students think about how they are engaged in the learning community we're trying to create. And in subsequent work, Kirsty has talked about how this can be integrated into learning design patterns. And we'll come back to that later on, the integration of analytics into learning design. Embodied learning. Learning is not all happening up here. Many, many kinds of learning are in my body and in my relationship to others of you at certain points in the work that we do. And we're very interested in how multimodal analytics will start to change that, to make that visible. So here we are using a Sony Connect to recognize who's around the simulated patient. These are nursing students, busy at work. We can gather location data over time. And we can define certain zones of proximity to the patient, A, B, and C, and start to generate heat maps like this that show who's in the different zones. That means we can start to make visible in a completely new way how different teams have been working around the patient in this case. In another case, it might be some other artifact that's being designed physically. And this is a paper we'll be presenting shortly at the UMAP conference, which basically says, look, we can start to do sequence analysis on how there are transitions between the quintiles for the different groups. And the idea here is that we don't yet know what good looks like. It's too complex to be able to judge or grade that automatically. But we can make these visible, and we can provoke productive reflection by putting this in front of students to get them reflecting on what was going on and how they're different from other groups. Mindsets and dispositions. So the idea of dispositional analytics, which is how do we create the right habits of mind, the right orientation to risk and uncertainty? And how on earth could we assess that? Again, how could we actually evidence the claims that we'd like to make about what we're doing with our students? Here's one example. This is going on in a Sydney high school. I had no idea this was happening when I arrived in Sydney, but this chap, Robin Nodge, found me and said, Simon, is anybody doing this? I'm assessing student effort because effort for me is critical, and the teacher assesses every student using a very brief rubric for how much effort they're putting in over term. Okay, so we've got academic performance running up the X, and we've got the assessed effort running along the Y. Okay, we've got girls in blue and boys in green, as it happens. And we can click on a student here. This is using that wonderful, time series animation that Google put together. And you can click and press play. And you would see that this student starts drifting left, putting in less effort. Dropping over time. Sorry, we're going this way. Over time, they're putting in more effort, and their grade starts to go up. But then the grade starts to drop, and then it starts to rise again, whereas we've got a different pattern here. There's a video which will show you this, which Robin's put together. Okay. And you can he sits down with students now and with parents and says, look what's been happening over time. Look how you've changed over the course of the semester, and look what's been going on with your grade as well. Grades change much more slowly, but if students put effort in, they immediately start to see it becomes visible. Okay, so this is he gave a whole seminar at KIC last year, about a year ago. If you want to learn more about that, and he was one of the practitioners that we invited to contribute to the special issue that we put together on 21st century skills and learning analytics. Another example some of you will be familiar with, but I've got some new work to show you, is a survey-based approach. So Ruth Crick, my colleague, has been developing work around this for about the last 15 years now, we're answering about 40 questions about how you approach your learning, how much from not at all like me all the way to very much like me. So what? It's a survey tool, right? But luckily, your answers don't just disappear into a black hole with a thank you for your time. What you get back is, I'll show you in a minute. I just want to say a word on this. This is the underlying structure behind the survey tool. Okay? So there are a whole bunch of constructs that they've been validating, all centered around agency, which is a real driver for these other constructs. And then there are some others which are to do with belonging and collaboration, and another one to do with openness. And you can see some of the sub-constructs there. But that's a structural equation model. So I just wanted to show you that because A, that's about the internal structure of the survey tool. You know, it's been validated, etc. But B, let's imagine we wanted to try and track student activity in online tools. Having an underlying empirically based model like this could be extremely useful because we'd be defining proxies for mindful agency, and we'd be defining proxies for curiosity, and proxies for sense-making. And we would have some understanding of how those actually connect from this work. Okay, so you do the survey, and out comes a spider diagram immediately. Immediate feedback to the student, which allows them to see how they see themselves. That's all this is. It's how you see yourself. So you're holding a mirror up to the student. Of course, there's been some background work where the responses have been loaded onto the different dimensions. And then we've got a framework for coaching, reflection. There's a whole bunch of resources that they can look at. Connects to UTS student resources as well. Now, the challenge is, supposing you've got 900 science undergraduates all doing this. We cannot have a one-on-one coaching conversation with 900 students. So we've been thinking about how you scale this. One approach is to do peer coaching. So we get them into triads, and they take it in turns to share their profile, and we give them coaching about how to engage with that. You know, this isn't about fixing or solving your partner's profile or telling them what they should do, but it's just about asking them what meaning they can read into it and what they think it might mean. Right? So that's one approach. But another approach is to introduce fictional personas. So this is a fictional persona for James. All right? And it explains a little bit about James and what his strengths and weaknesses are. Okay. He doesn't have a core group of friends. He doesn't understand why his friends don't want to talk to him very much sometimes. He came out as an incredibly curious person, but has a moderate sense of belonging, very little agency. Okay. So James is a fictional character, and there are about 7 of these archetypes that were created in consultation with the science academics, where we're saying, tell us about the kind of students you're having to deal with. How do they vary? You know, so you've got the overseas international student who's incredibly compliant, always does what he's told, but again, not much agency, isn't has grown up in a school system that just said, do what you're told. You know. So we've got 7 of these stories, and the idea is that student mentors, second, third, fourth years, can introduce these personas to first years. It's safe because these aren't real people, and this helps the undergraduates, first years, to understand what it might mean when they're looking at their profile and thinking, oh, I'm a bit like James. Okay. And we're now sort of looking at how we're scaling this up. So you can do a pre and a post profile and look at the differences. And we've shown that from the sample, we've got about 3,000 profiles from the work we've been doing, piloting for the last period, and we could show that there were statistically significant changes on all of the dimensions. We can also do a sort of cluster analysis and say, are there distinct shapes in the corpus? Okay. So here we're looking at not individual profiles, but a corpus. 548 students had profiles that looked quite worrying. Okay? Worrying in the sense that we know from prior research that students who report themselves in this way struggle with complexity, open-ended problems, collaboration, not much curiosity and agency, etc. Okay. These students, although one student, just because you've got a big profile, well, that might be there for many reasons. You might be deluded about just how great you are, right? So size isn't everything. But if you've got 876 students showing up like that, that's interesting. Are there any demographics? Are there any cohort divisions there? You know, we have, of course, got breakdowns by faculty subject. Right? Can't show you those for obvious reasons, but we can look at the diagnosis of how students in a particular faculty see themselves, and we might start reflecting on what kinds of interventions we might want to make in the teaching as well as with the student support. Okay. So this is exciting for us because we've now got, you know, starting to see the glimpses of what, this is not big data in the sort of big sense, but we've got cohort data which allows us to do some quite meaningful statistics on this, as well as having, you know, when you embed this in your subject, you will have rich qualitative student narratives about their learning journeys, and you might have interviews with staff and students as well. So this is a low-tech way of doing this. Here's a higher-tech way, which some of you will be familiar with, from Val Shute, her stealth assessment approach, where we're going to try and assess conscientiousness. Well, that's a pretty complicated construct, but within her computer game, conscientiousness can be quantified because there are some subconstructs that a conscientious person would display. There are some sub ones here, and they translate into log traces in the game. Okay. And in the special issue in the JLA that I mentioned, we have a number of examples of people who are building these kinds of trees, right? I want to try and quantify quite a high order 21st century competency, and I'm going to break it down to the level at which I could extract this out of the log files. It's quite exciting, right? And this is actually just from, this is not from self-report, this is from behavior, in this case from a game. Okay, another category of analytic that we get very excited about is reflection. Reflection is where you are basically being encouraged to bare your soul. Okay? Reflection is critical to this integration of academic and experiential knowledge. It's where it starts to come together for many students, when they're actually given permission to talk about what they don't know. Right? So normally, when you submit an assignment, it's saying, at this point in time, look how much I know. Right? That's what an assignment is, right? In reflective writing, you disclose what you don't know. You disclose, in the first person usually, how you feel you've been changing as a learner. And all the scholarship that goes into reflection allows us to make some claims about what good reflective writing looks like, okay? To the extent that you believe that what people write is a window onto their mind. And that's a reasonable claim, okay? And they typically talk about something that happened, which has provoked certain kinds of reactions. They'll talk about things that were certainly challenging or unfamiliar, because this has raised an issue for them of some sort, right? It could be anything from, that theory I was taught does not work out in the workplace, to, I had this incredibly traumatic encounter with my consultant who, you know, shamed me in front of all the other nurses, whatever it might be, okay? It's the whole spectrum, right? But these things matter. And here's a screenshot from the system we presented at LAC this year, which is a reflective writing analytics tool using that iconography. We've added different kinds of underlining there as well, where we are differentiating sort of epistemic statements, more self-critique statements, and stuff to do with affect and feelings. Okay. So you can see they're talking here about the situation. They're talking here about something that was challenging, and they're talking here about things that they would change perhaps in the future. Okay. This isn't perfect. This is natural language text about pretty deep stuff. So the machine is going to get it wrong. Okay? But that's okay, because we want to encourage the students to push back. Because if they push back and say, well, that's not the right classification, or I did talk about the challenge, you know, but why hasn't it got an orange, a pink blob next to it? right? That's the right kind of conversation to have. We've gone way beyond grammar, spelling, and plagiarism. We're talking now about the higher order features of good reflective writing. Okay. And this works best when we're working with our academics who care passionately about reflective writing and have integrated it into their subject, and there are assignments around reflective writing. If reflective writing is something that, we'd like you to blog once a week if you can, but it doesn't really matter if you don't because we're not assessing it anyway, well, need I say more? Okay. All right, more examples in the JLA issue from last year. Okay, I keep saying it, I'm going to say it again, but in a different way. Learning design is really important. So Simon Knight and I have written in a couple of different ways, most recently in the handbook of learning analytics that just came out, about the eternal triangle and the fact that learning analytics is never neutral. Learning analytics is always within epistemology, pedagogy, and assessment, right? This is our interpretation of that expression, the middle space, where learning meets computation. You cannot escape from this. Whether or not you're aware of it, you are making implicit claims about what it means to know something, how the student is going to learn, and what it is that matters, right? So what we are arguing is that learning analytics have got to be integrated coherently into the curriculum. And that's a systemic issue at that point. Right? We talked a little bit this morning in the academic innovation unit about the fact that analytics is going to do cool things, but there's system changes that need to happen at the level of the academic and how they conceive learning and how they do their teaching, as well as the broader systems like curriculum and scheduling and so forth. Okay, so in the final few minutes, I just want to think about, if we take examples like that as signs of the future, I put it to you that these are signs of the future of where we want to be going if analytics is going to talk the language of higher order competencies, habits of mind, transferable skills. You're not going to find this in your average product right now. Okay. Universities want innovation, and there are lots of research groups around, but universities also want to see this impact. And we've been trying to figure out at UTS, how do we do both together? So just a brief word on the journey that UTS has been on as a university of technology, trying to take this seriously. So back in 2011, I wasn't there at the time, but Shirley Alexander, she is my boss, DVC for Education, they convened a whole day-long thing with all of the senior leadership, even brought in strange characters like George Siemens, to talk about how data science is changing the world, okay? Industry, education, etc. Okay. This triggered, this was the start of a very high-level strategic priority on data science, and they talked at the time of the data-intensive university. Right. The journey since then went something like this. They changed the name to Connected Intelligence. That's where my center gets its name. Many academics weren't happy with the term data intensive. It just felt a little bit too techy and reductionist for them. Connected intelligence was much nicer. Let's join dots up, let's get people working together, let's connect siloed data sets but with ideas as well, okay? And a university-wide consultation started on what would it mean to be a connected intelligence, what would it mean to have a university that was connected in this way? A strategy was created. They started running forums on privacy and ethics because everyone was, getting agitated about privacy and ethics. And we started conceiving a new master's degree. 2014, I arrived. The center was launched, and we started advertising our existence and reassuring people that we weren't just data scientists who loved counting low-level clicks. We actually cared deeply about pedagogy and learning theory and about, higher order learning, etc. And invited people to submit projects to us, suggesting the kinds of things they would love to do. We launched our master's degree in analytics, and we started piloting with the faculties. So these are the champions in the faculties who were keen to work with us some of them facilitated by startup grants, and beginning to gather data. And then by the end of last year, we have some tools that are starting to look like they had legs, beginning to get data sets, and start reporting to the university's senior board about what we've been doing and how well their money's been spent. So today, go to the website to learn more about it. But basically, we sit in the middle, servicing the faculties and the research institutes, both on the teaching and learning front, but also researchers who might be interested in text analytics or network analytics, for example. We work with our student support units, and we work with our business units as well. So these people are just running the university, but they've got tough statistical or data science problems that they could learn from, and we are trying to service them as well. I want to focus on a couple of other things that have happened just on our strategic landscape. Is the creation of our new faculty, a new first-class academic entity, with a real dean and a real everything that a faculty has, all around transdisciplinarity. Teaching and learning in a transdisciplinary way, not just researching in a transdisciplinary way. So many academics are comfortable with the idea that research is transdisciplinary, but not teaching. Teaching in first-year undergraduates who have barely got a discipline to call their own, how to work with other first-year undergraduates coming from other. So we've been really studying the pedagogy of how you get first years and upwards working across their traditional siloed boundaries. And we have a Bachelor's of Creative Intelligence and Innovation, which has absolutely been a barnstormer for us. It's massively, massively oversubscribed. And industry are just saying, give us more people like this. They have got such agency, such design thinking skills. They've got depth in one subject, but they've also got that horizontal T-bar, the T-shaped graduate. They've got that depth because they're doing a full degree in science or law or whatever it might be. And during their, they also have these intensive horizontal sessions where they do very intensive work with Visa and Google, Sydney-based companies, government offices who are bringing real problems to them and then learning how to think out of the box and use all the kind of design thinking. And the other thing that we've been doing a lot of is around creative intelligence, and we have a whole sort of strategy around that. So in the air before I even arrived is this notion of creative intelligence, and we're connecting that to machine intelligence. And that, we feel, is that's just a dance that has to keep going. Okay. And that's the flavor of all the work we try and do. Okay, so one aspect of being at the UTS, which is completely new for me, is the following. It's the question of where should the analytics group be in the university? So some of you will be sitting in universities and you have responsibility for learning analytics. Where are you sitting? Okay, default model number one. You're basically in this kind of space, the business intelligence space, or you're running the learning management system and it came with analytics. Okay, or there's a data warehouse being built for the university. All data should eventually come through that data mart, including student-related data. Okay? So this is all about rollout and impact, but these guys are not typically going to be innovating in the kinds of ways I've been talking about. Right? They don't know anything about education or learning or pedagogy or learning sciences. Okay? It's not their fault. It's just a different kind of function. Right? So we don't sit there. Okay, here's where most other people would be, right? You're in a center somewhere, in a school, in a faculty, and you're interested in learning analytics. Okay. I would imagine how many people are sitting in that kind of position? Not that many. I'm interested. Okay. That's where most learning analytics researchers are, okay? They have decided they want to get interested in learning analytics. No one forced them to, right? And they are sort of busy trying to find academics who are interested in actually deploying these tools with their students, and they are talking to the gatekeepers of data and being good researchers. But we don't sit there either. So we sit here in the office of the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Education, and we are trying to do both together. So she's hired a professor who's built an academic research team, but we're sitting in what is basically a student services and support operation, which is an interesting space to be. Okay. So this is what it looks like in the sort of slightly bigger picture, okay? Our job is to sit outside of the faculties, work right across the university. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other faculties going that way, finding the academics who get excited about the potential of learning analytics, and also working that way because we want our stuff to potentially roll out as mainstream 24/7 production services. And some of these guys are sitting on data or are going to be the channels by which we get our data. Okay. So some of the work that we do could connect to the LMS. Some of the work we do will want to be sucking data out of the business intelligence system. And we work as a sort of neutral entities right across the university in that way. That has some advantages. Okay, so the skill set we bring looks like this. And you would probably find, and that this is very, very similar to what you've got here in academic innovation. Okay, we're just not as well developed as you guys yet. I don't hire anybody I can't trust to send to a high-level meeting in the university and actually communicate what they do in language for mere mortals. And I think about it like we have to be able to talk in the boardroom and in the common room and in the server room. So that's the skill set. All right, so this for me is what a learning analytics team looks like. Not everybody has all of those competencies, but that's my best sort of crack at it at the moment. Okay, the advantages of operating in this kind of organizational context, right? So I'm reporting direct to a DVC. Nobody in the middle, which is fantastic. And of course, I can talk to the director of IT, the director of student support services, all the other directors who are sitting on data or support services that would interact with the analytics we're developing. And they'll meet with me. You know, I'm not a professor in a faculty somewhere trying to get their attention. It's just a different status, which is very helpful. Right? If we don't feel we're getting the support we need from the IT division, you know, literally, because they don't really understand yet what we do. You know, I just called a meeting last week and said, we're now in an interesting space, guys. We're now developing student-facing systems. You're not the only people who do that anymore now. And we need better support, and they are completely understanding, and we're working out a solution that we can get the kinds of, you know, cloud computing facilities that we need to work much faster. And those are the kinds of conversations that can happen now. If I was a professor in a faculty, I'm not sure if that would be quite so easy. So that means that, you know, we've got this close coupling. So every week I'm sitting with the directors of the other services concerned with the student experience. Very, very helpful. There is no sort of faculty turf war going on because I'm not in a faculty. So that's helpful sometimes. And we get baseline funding because we are a service university student experience impact center. That's very nice too. I've never had baseline funding in my life. I always had to go and write grant bids, right? So that's fantastic, but it comes at the price that my primary client is UTS. So I can't just go off and dream big thoughts and write my papers and travel the world being a fabulous academic. If I can't show impact into UTS, then I can wave goodbye to my baseline funding. So that's the deal. Okay, wrapping up then. First lesson from this. LA plus LD. Okay? That makes life complicated because that means things have to change in the way that the academics teach potentially, or they may need to tweak what they're doing because we want to insert a writing feedback tool. So at what point in the assignment will the students encounter the writing feedback tool? Will it be synced with the way they've been taught about writing? How will they think about the feedback that's coming back? Okay. If Clara is going to be deployed, how does that spider diagram connect to all the competencies and graduate attributes that are associated with that subject? Is it aligned? If it's not aligned, the students won't understand why they're seeing this stuff, why they're being asked to use these interesting tools, which are kind of cool, but did it improve my grade? If it doesn't improve my grade, I don't care. IA, not AI. Okay. Now, this is not an anti-AI statement, but this is the intelligence augmentation as opposed to AI in the sense that we were going to automate stuff and take the human out of the loop. We are trying to amplify human intelligence. That's the Doug Engelbart statement there, okay? And so I'm suggesting that in this very kind of complex kinds of competencies we're talking about, in authentic learning, which is very hard to control, in open-ended inquiry, where there may not even be a known correct answer, because that's what a real-world job is like sometimes, learning analytics' job is less to grade and more to try and provoke productive reflection. So this is my last slide. There's the little graphic that I introduced earlier about moving to higher ground. And there's the problem, okay? That it's a moving target, and we may have to keep climbing higher and higher up the mountain because the machines are getting smarter and smarter. Well, we can complain about that, but that's life, okay? So what's our job? As learning analytics people, it's to make persistent and visible what until now has been ephemeral and invisible. Okay? So one of the most exciting things about learning analytics for me is that the process that people undertake is as important as the final product, because it shows how they're thinking, how they're working with other people. And educators have known this for a long time, but it was very hard to evidence because we couldn't practically track process, other than when you were, a bunch of researchers who were studying at a very small scale in great detail. Now we have surveillance technology, sensor technology, comes with ethical responsibilities, but we can track process and we can make it visible. The heat maps that showed the positions around the patient's bed, the way in which your writing has been changing over time as you redraft, etc. And so our task then is to try and design this sense-making experience. It's going to be formative feedback, and the goal is to provoke reflection and insight and creativity and deeper learning, these things that humans will always be uniquely capable of. And even as the machines get smarter, great. That means we can make more and more things visible that were invisible before. And ask the students, what do you think about this? And it's not, this is what you've been doing. It's, this is what the machine could see you were doing. Is this interesting? Does that look right? Push back if you don't agree. Have a conversation with the machine or with each other, but you're having the right kind of conversation in our view. So we are really back to Doug Engelbart and augmenting human intellect rather than trying to automate it. Thank you very much.
We have time for questions, and I'm going to let Simon field his own questions.
Sure.
As he can.
Okay. Anybody want to go first? Chris.
So Simon, you spoke at the end there about students pushing back, right? The idea that we might reflect on those behaviors, the traces, ask them if it's interested, involve in conversation, really helping them. At the same time, in higher ed, there's a lot of journalistic practices that we know best. We've been through this. How do you balance those with learning analytics in particular? Data, and there's, I guess something on here is show the students the data they can make the right decision, or show the students the data they won't understand. How do we translate that to you describe?
Okay. By the way, do we have roving mics so the questions are being picked up on for the recording? I'll repeat the question, but I'm sure I saw some mics around. So the question is, in higher ed, there's a lot of paternalism, which is we know best. And what I was hearing you saying was that academics may be resistant to students pushing back against the analytics because they have a high degree of confidence in the analytics, and they don't want the students to push back. That kind of...
Or don't even think to engage the students.
Okay, don't even, yeah. So whether the students even, some people think of learning analytics as fundamentally about me being able to track them in higher and higher fidelity, right? And that's why, that's a particular kind of mindset, as opposed to saying, I want to empower the students by giving them better and better feedback loops, right? That's why we're in that triangle, right? Because a mindset that says, I want to try and give better and better feedback loops to a student to provoke more and more sense-making and reflection about how they tackle their learning is a very different approach to learning. Okay, so if an academic had such confidence in the analytics that they didn't think the students should be pushing back, that would be kind of interesting. Well, we've got an academic with confidence in the analytics, so that's good, right? So let's not complain about that. But I'm thinking about situations where the machine is invariably going to get it wrong sometimes, I think. So there are certain situations where the machine will not get it wrong, right? In an adaptive tutoring system, the machine's generally correct. You haven't mastered grammar, you haven't mastered, Pythagoras, and don't you dare disagree. Just practice again. Okay, fine. But if we're talking about collaboration ability, or if we're talking about your level of curiosity, or if we're talking about whether you really stated the problem before you started proposing the solution in your writing, that's really complex stuff, and the machine may get it wrong. And those are the situations where we do want to encourage the students not to take the machine at its word, I would argue. And I think this is a paper that Abelardo and Kirsty Quito and Andrew and I are busy trying to work on, to try and articulate the situation where we want students to disagree with the analytics, because that's pedagogically productive. Yeah.
When we're talking about dispositions, these are sort of what Ruth would call affective objectives, in a way. And we have a tradition in, I would say, Western education culture. We don't grade on those. We don't grade on whether you like the subject, only whether you memorized the pieces I told you to memorize. And part of the reason is probably because it's been so hard to measure whether somebody really likes something. So I wonder if this is something we need to be careful about now. If we are developing ways to know if someone likes our subject or has become persistent or conscientious or these other sort of value-making things, do we want to be careful not to flunk somebody because they didn't have the right attitudes? Or should we?
Okay. So the question is, these affective dimensions to learning, we've always known they're important, but we never could measure them till now. Now we can, and what do we do with that kind of, that burden? So this connects to a whole bunch of interesting things, right? One is just generally the question of the burden of knowledge that analytics now brings, and the obligation of the university possibly to act on it. That's a broad concern. Should somebody get failed was the question because they didn't have enough conscientiousness, or because they weren't showing enough resilience. Well, these are qualities that we value. Giving somebody, a merit or a pass on curiosity or creativity or agency, that feels really weird, doesn't it? But is it weird just because we never knew how to do it, and now we do? So if a course says it's important for you to be able to, perform to the following level on all the kinds of traditional grades, but that alone is no longer adequate, because out there you're going to have to work in a high-performance team, and it's not just about what you accomplished, but how you did it. It's not just about whether you solved a problem or not, but how you went about solving it. I may give you a problem for which there is no correct answer. I want to know how you went about tackling it. And I've got process data that shows how you went about tackling it. And if you persistently fail because you keep going at it in the wrong way, I might decide that you haven't yet reached the grade. And that's okay, you know. But, you know, the idea of, you can imagine so many people, and some of you may be sitting here now thinking, oh no, you know, now we can quantify these beautiful human qualities like curiosity and a sense of belonging, right? What next? You know, we've lost the plot. And I guess it depends on what you're going to do with it. You know, are you going to fail someone for a loss of not having a strong enough sense of belonging? Of course not. You know, you're going to do something about it, hopefully. And exactly what you do, you know, we don't know. I mean, I have a scary slide that I didn't use today where a university has been tracking students around the campus, looking at whether they buy the university sweatshirt and go to the university cafeteria very often and talk in groups of friends with people, because and how well they engage in extracurricular activities, because that's evidence, quantitative evidence of their sense of belonging. Right? Now, we're not going to fail anybody for that, and they want to use that from the highest possible motives to flag somebody who might be at risk. But we can quantify that stuff now, at least with proxies, you know. So, I'm thinking about time. Do we have time for? Okay, quick follow-up then.
It occurs to me this also relates to the other question about doing higher education being kind of patronizing, where the faculty is going to decide whether you pass or fail, whereas perhaps this should be more of a conversation where we're working with a student to say, do you think you're ready?
That's much more what I was thinking. Yeah, I was going to say something like that. You know, what we want is for the student to take on board the feedback, to decide whether it's saying something that they own, right, and to then figure out, with support, possibly from student support services if they need them, what might I do? You know, if you're telling me that, you know, it's really important to develop this competency, then, you know, tell me how to do that, please. You know, and now we can have the conversation. So these are qualitatively different things from, you know, traditional grading, I would say. Because we're trying to turn out lifelong learners. We're not trying to turn out people who say, oh, you said I should be more curious. Okay, which hoop should I jump through to become more curious? No, 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 no. You know, we've lost the plot at that point. Okay. All right. Somebody had a question over here. Okay.
So, I know you talked about high order, higher ground, moving everybody to higher ground. But to some effect, there's still some undertones here of targeting this as a solution or an approach to a problem to help people survive rather than each individual thrive to their full potential. Am I misreading that? Are we really heading in that direction, or are we still focusing on who do we need to take out of the great holes of that?
Well, that's maybe where my rising water metaphor has its limitations. I mean, we don't want people to drown, but the reality is many people are going to be out of work in the next 10 or 20 years, just as we've seen with previous, you know, levels of automation. If it doesn't fall to the education sector to help find solution, then, you know, whose job is it? So there is a sort of survive dimension to this, I think. But the thrive thing, the thrive word, as opposed to survive, is, you know, really important. You know, we are trying to figure out how can you thrive in unprecedented turbulence and uncertainty, which are about the only things we do know the future holds. Right? So if the only thing we know about the future is that it's uncertain and it's going to throw wobblies at us, and people are going to vote in weird ways, and technology is going to throw completely unexpected things at us, and we're suddenly going to have, you know, political unrest, and new markets are going to suddenly open up we hadn't thought of 2 years ago, and people are going to start spending money and have new currencies that didn't even exist a few years ago, right? It's all turbulence, it's all white water, and that's the new normal. So we have to equip our students to cope with that kind of turbulence. Otherwise, we have completely lost the plot. And for me, this is my way of trying to figure out what part does learning analytics have to play in the education sector, which of course we know is a dinosaur to try and turn around. But to what extent could learning analytics be a Trojan horse for change? A Trojan horse because it makes possible certain things that academics have always wanted to do but never could, so kind of gave up on. A Trojan horse because it makes it possible to evidence and make claims about impact that we never could claim until now, because it never was practical to do it except in esoteric, exotic research projects. That for me is the exciting thing about learning analytics, that the tools that until now have been the preserve of researchers to study objects and subjects of inquiry are now becoming available to the very people who constitute that situation, the learners and the educators. They've got amazing computational firepower available to them that researchers only dreamed of a decade ago. And the question is, how do we use those to create the feedback loops and the evidence building capacity that we know we need for sort of systemic innovation? So, yeah. How are we doing, Stephanie? Okay.
Sure. So I want to ask a little bit about this measurements of dispositions like you use with the CLAR tool and so on. And in particular, or maybe in part at least, the use of personas. So one challenge with measuring something like someone's dispositions about creativity and so on is that most people believe these are intrinsic traits built into them and relatively unchangeable. And when you provide things like personas, you maybe reinforce that idea. In fact, I believe probably the faculty members who gave you those personas and said, I have kids like this. What they meant, they have students like this, right? What they meant is, they're like this, and I just have to work with them.
Well, some might. The ones we were working with weren't, because they're top educators. But this is what walks into my classroom out of high school.
And so students often will conceive of themselves that way. And so when you run your survey, I mean, after all, with this kind of survey, thinking about like Myers-Briggs type, all those kinds of surveys that are out there, that told people they were going to tell them who they were, right? So how do you deal with that? Do you work on that explicitly?
It's really important. So the question is, are you not just sort of reinforcing a sort of typecast? This is how you are. This is your Clara profile. So deal with it, right? As opposed to, this is how you see yourself at the moment, and this is really drawing, in part on Carol Dweck's work as well as many others. This shape is elastic. Right? How are we going to change it? Whole bunch of resources to think about it. If the integration has been done very well within the subject, it is designed to stretch and challenge you on some of those dimensions. In some of the support tools, you actually go into a mode where you say, okay, I really want to work on my curiosity. The fact that I don't take things as they're given, that I start asking tougher questions, and you stretch out curiosity, right? So it's a shape that's designed to be malleable. And that's a really important message. And then the fact that they take it, say, later on, and it's changed, is itself reinforcing the idea that this is not your Myers-Briggs personality that that you were born with, and you just have to invent, ways of managing that. This is an elastic thing, and it may even get smaller, right? So we talk sometimes about a heartbeat, right? So you take a Clara profile, it's the first time you've ever done it, you're not sure you trust it, you answer some of the questions a certain way, you may be slightly deluded, or you may be very, very modest, and it comes out a certain way. But after understanding more about it, after engaging in the subject, which is hopefully stretching and challenging you, you do it again and it comes out different. Smaller isn't necessarily worse if you can understand what was going on. It's all about how honest were you, and can you make sense of how this is talking back to you about what's going on. So, very important to watch that this isn't a typecasting thing.
So perhaps one of the ways to do that would be to have personas that aren't personas, but are pathways. The story you just described.
There could be another chapter to that where Jack, John, or whatever his name was, has been doing some work. Yeah. One of the pieces we want to do is translate those generic dimensions into. And what does it mean to be more curious as a first year, second year science undergrad? You know, what does it mean to have more agency as a lawyer, as a law student? Okay. What's that going to look like? It's just to help bridge to the world of the actual discipline the student's in.
One last question over here. Yeah. And then we'll announcements.
So, in your talk, I really appreciate talking about how we go beyond LMS to get at these higher order constructs that we want to have proxies for these features. One thing that I've been curious about, and I think the multimodal learning analytics starts to push in this direction, is what are analytics in the K-12 classroom like? And one pushback that I felt from different learning science scholars is, don't you think that teachers already know about their students' traits in these higher concepts? So don't they know who their engagement are? And I tend to argue no. But I wanted to know if you could reflect on that and what is the place of this type of work outside of the university, especially with those more developing, maybe those higher risks are more valuable.
Okay, so the question is, to what extent are the techniques I showed relevant to K through 12, not just higher ed? Okay, well, first thing is to say that Clara, for example, comes from K through 12 work initially. So that kids can have conversations about their learning power profiles. We know that already. It's very, very exciting to see. Don't teachers already know their students so well that, that they don't need a tool to tell them this? Well, maybe, because they're only dealing with perhaps 30 kids or something. But if you want the students to start to talk about those things, if you want the students to have a language for learning, if you want the students to reflect on the process they've been going through, you've got to make it visible, right? And that's one of the arguments. Yeah, but I'll be very happy to talk more about this. And LAC'17 is going to really emphasize K through 12 because it is an underrepresented sector within the LAC community, and we're going to be running 1 or 2 events specifically targeting the school sector because there are more and more people with hats on which say, sort of data analyst in the high school, and they're not very well networked, they're not very aware of what we do, they're under different constraints, but there are some outstanding examples of work going on, and we want to try and connect them into a community of practice. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. That got us off. For questions after, plenty of time for questions. This is about interacting and talking with each other and bouncing around ideas. So be prepared to not just be a listener when we have the keynotes. The next thing I wanted to do before we go to the refreshments and so forth is I want to make a few more people, introduce them to you, and make them more visible to you while you're here. And so the first person is my co-chair, Tim McKay. He's here at Michigan with me and helps me. We do this together every year with the support of the Office of Academic Innovation and the blessing and support of SOLAR. So Tim, thanks for doing it with me again this year. I also want to make visible, let you know who these workshop and tutorial leads are. Who are they? So I'm going to ask them to stand, and when I say your name. So Charles is doing the workshop on automated personalization in education. This is Charles. Javier is doing multimodal analytics. That's Javier right there. Britta was supposed to do this with Erica, but she's here alone. Thank you, Britta, for coming and doing it by yourself. And our thoughts are with Erica, who couldn't be here today. Abelardo is telling us about data to student support actions. That's Abelardo back there. Hello. Simon, of course. Chris Brooks here at Michigan is helping us learn about predictive models of student success with his colleague and co-conspirator, Craig Thompson. He's here. Thank you. So those are the main workshop leads, along with Sean Goggins, whose flight got delayed. He's doing the social network analysis one. He's somewhere up in the air, we hope, and he will be here by tomorrow morning. We have a few other people who are doing tutorials that are kind of standalone or don't have an associated workshop. That includes, which side of my paper has this? Right, that includes Pablo. Here he is, joining us for the first time this year. Pablo from RMIT, thank you for being here. Nia is here at Michigan, the new postdoc here. Nia is doing a workshop on statistical analysis of interdependent observations in learning environments, ERGMs, with Sasha, who's back here too. Thanks for being here. And Grace Lynch, I've introduced you to briefly, is my co-conspirator for the institutional data governance policy tutorial that we're doing on Wednesday. So there are other people to thank, and we will do so as the days unfold, because this is a very collaborative event. And students, we're thrilled. We have 17 students here this year, and as promised, we have scholarships for you to help with the costs of your attending here. Grace is the other really important person you have to know for that. She needs information from you, not today, but we're thinking lunch on Tuesday. So bring her your plane ticket. We know you've registered, and we'll help offset the cost of housing for your 3 nights here as well. So we're very pleased as an organization to have scholarship money named in honor of memory of a dear colleague of many of us, Eric Duval. So that's providing scholarships. We have some corporate sponsors as well who gave money to the LAC conference and said if you don't use it all at LAC, please use it at LASI. So we have money from them as well. And we have some money from MIDAS, our Michigan Data Science Institute. So that allows us to do things here that we couldn't do without the support, because the registration fee for the people who pay it and don't get it back doesn't cover what it costs to run the institute. So we're very lucky to have the support, and I'm very grateful that we can do that. So that being said, you have your scavenger hunt sheet. The bar will open soon, and there's going to be food back there. And otherwise, tomorrow morning we meet back here in this room for our next keynote, who is Ginger Schultz. Is first Tuesday morning. Ginger, I think you're here with us. Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from Ginger tomorrow, and we'll see you here. So enjoy the reception. There's lots of great places to eat. You're right on campus, so you can any price point you can find here, and especially over at the summer festival. As I said, there's lots of fun options there as well. So let's mix and enjoy.